Hi, welcome back to my channel. I read 8 books this month, so let's talk about them. So the first book I read this month was a ebook, so I read it on my Kindle, and that was The Devil is Fine by John Vercher. This was a new release this summer, and I think I put it in my new release video that I posted in the spring. So it was definitely on my radar, and I saw it at my library, so I picked it up. This one definitely surprised me. Basically, you open up the book and it starts with this man, this Black American man, who is going to the funeral of his son. And you don't really know what happened to the son. You don't really know what the relationship with his son is. And as you go on, you kind of realize him and his son didn't have a good relationship. And he doesn't have a good relationship with the mother of his son. And as it progresses, he learns that his father has left a large piece of land for his son, but now that his son has passed, he has gained that land. It is a large piece of land that used to be a plantation and used to have slaves on it, and slaves work the land. So obviously, him being black, there's a lot of things going on there. And so he goes to this land to figure out what to do with it, how to sell it, and all these weird things start happening, and he starts to have a lot of flashbacks of when his son was alive and all these moments that he kind of missed in their relationship, and why race kind of plays a part in it as well. There's some magical realism elements in it that I was not expecting, but I really liked. And it is just an interesting novel about grief, regret, race. There is definitely a meta tone to it because the author is writing a book about basically what is happening to him. So we're reading a story about an author who's writing about this story. And it's just really interesting. It wasn't what I expected, but I really enjoyed it. I think if you liked Our Wives Under the Sea, you kind of like that weird tone, not quite getting the full picture and magical realism elements. I think you might like this. It is definitely like a weird lit fic book. It definitely is a modern tale because there's definitely talk about wokeness and diversity hires, and there's just a lot of things going on in this book, but I think the author does it really well and really uniquely, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. Next, I read The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I am kind of late to this book. A lot of people have read this book and it is really beloved. I just missed the boat on it, and I read Donna Tartt's book, The Goldfinch, which was also very popular quite a few years ago, and I did not love it. I think sometimes too, reading a book and how much you enjoy it, it has a lot to do with timing and being open to that book or understanding that book or wherever you are in your life. And I think maybe with The Goldfinch, I just wasn't in the right point or the right time to be reading that book. So although I don't remember liking it, I can say that I may like it now. I don't know. So, anyways, I went in and read The Secret History. I definitely saved it for September because I wanted to wait till I felt like fall was around the corner. This has been said to be the godfather of dark academia. It's so hyped that I was a little nervous because I've read a lot of books recently that have been very hyped, and I've been really underwhelmed. So I really tried to go into this book with an open mind and then just to take it page by page. Sometimes when I'm going into a really hyped book, I'm like trying to get to the parts where things happen or certain moments and trying to quickly understand why people love that. And with this one, I just tried to take it in moment by moment and just take it for what it was. And I think that really helped my reading experience of it. I ended up really enjoying it. This follows a group of, I want to say, what is it, 4 or 5 main characters, and they're all very distinct. They all have very distinct personalities and different dynamics and relationships with each other, and they're really well fleshed out. And there is amazing atmosphere in this book. You definitely can imagine all the different areas that they're in, the different tones. There's just something so atmospheric about the book and the writing, but the writing is done so well. It's not where you feel like you're reading paragraph after paragraph of descriptions. It's just kind of placed in there throughout, so you're constantly reminded of where they are and the feeling of that moment. And I really enjoyed it. I was not expecting a lot of things that happened in this book, and it is very lengthy, and there are a lot of points in this book where there's maybe not a lot of action going on, but there's a lot of character development and a lot of different things going on where I thought, like, what would I do? Like, what would I think if I was in that situation? And I love that in a book. I definitely understand why people make the comparison with Dead Poets Society in this. If you've seen that movie, then you know that it's kind of about a group of boys. They're off at school, they're experiencing things for the first time, and something big happens, and then kind of the fallout from that moment. And that was very similar to this. So I definitely see those comparisons. Anyways, I really enjoyed this book. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I'm really glad that I saved it for this time of the year, and I really enjoyed it. Thankfully, because a lot of other really popular books lately I have not been enjoying. I've been very let down. Next, I read Blue Sisters. So I read Coco Malore's first novel, Cleopatra and Frankenstein. I think I read it last month. And although I didn't love it, I did like how she wrote her characters. They were very gritty, vulnerable, and they were doing things that were different than what I've read in other books recently. And so I heard a lot of great things about Blue Sisters. It was a new release in September, and a lot of people were eating it up. Unfortunately, it just didn't really do it for me. I found a lot of problems with the motivations for a lot of these characters. There was a lot of telling and not showing in and around all the different relationships with the sisters and all their romantic relationships. I mean, the book starts the tone, and there's a prologue that is basically like, a sister is not your friend, and kind of goes through this prologue of like why blood is thicker than water and why sisters are so close innately. And then as the story starts, we realize all of these sisters are kind of spread out in the world, and they're off doing their own thing, and we're kind of led to believe maybe these sisters aren't that close and they're so different. And so you're like, oh, okay, these sisters aren't that close. But then when they get together and things happen, we keep being told that they're so close that they would do anything for each other. There's a bond like no other. But we're not shown that. We're not shown why. We're only shown the opposite of that. And then throughout, the characters really villainize the parents and the mom and dad, and for things that they did or they didn't do that kind of messed these girls up in their youth or didn't help them growing up. And there wasn't any scenes with the father in this book. So I thought that was weird, because I'm like, if he's such a catalyst to so many things, but we don't have one scene with him in it, I felt like that was weird. And then the one scene we had with the mother, we're shown quite the opposite. We're shown the mother does have some compassion. And so I almost felt a little bit like unreliable narrator, because I was like, you've been telling us that she's crazy or you don't like her or she's bad. But then the one scene that she's in, she doesn't seem that bad. And I'm like, maybe you're the problem. So they keep telling us these certain things, but then we're showing the opposite. I was kind of confused. I just felt like a lot of the things didn't line up from what we were being told to what we were being shown. Along with that, the pacing kind of felt off in different parts. There was definitely sections where I was like, okay, where is this going? It's really dragging. Why do we need this scene? Overall, I think maybe Coco Malores is just not for me, and that is okay. I enjoyed the book enough to give it 3 stars. The things that I pointed out were kind of annoyances, but overall the book kind of did what it said it was going to do, and kind of explored these sister relationships in a time of grief. And one more thing. The major plot line in this book is that one of these sisters, there's 4 sisters, one of them passes away, and so the mom and dad decide to sell their family home that none of them live in. And to me, that would make sense. I'm like, yeah, why are you guys keeping that home? And the mom needs the money for I think the father's healthcare. But for some reason, the sisters are very adamant about their parents not selling their family home, even though none of them live in it and none of them visit it. And the whole plot is them coming back together in this family home to try to figure out how to save it and stop their parents from selling it. I mean, I don't think this is any large spoiler, but the house ends up being sold at the end of the day. And I'm like, what was the point of all of that? It was kind of weird, and I didn't understand why the sisters wanted to save this house. I didn't understand why that connected so much to the sister's death. It felt kind of like a plot line thrown in there to bring them together. I don't know. There was a lot of things that kind of left me questioning, and I didn't quite understand. So Yeah. The next book I read this month was Consent, and I'm not going to do too deep of a dive just because I spoke a lot about this in my blind book challenge video, which I posted before this one, and I'll link it down below. But overall, I really enjoyed this memoir. To give you just a brief overview, it is about a young French girl who is basically sexually abused at the age of 14, and she is in this relationship with a much, much older man. And once she gets out of this relationship years later, she continually is abused because this abuser is a writer, and he continues to write about his experience with her and publish letters that she wrote to him when she was younger, and basically embarrass her and try to shame her throughout his writing. So this memoir was written to kind of combat that and to give her side of the story, and it's really powerful. It's not super long, it packs a punch, and I really, really enjoyed it. I think she did a great job explaining kind of the buildup, the relationship, and the fallout from it. And I just think it was beautifully written as well. This is a French translation. A lot of the books that I've read that are French translation tend to be really prosy and really beautiful. And I don't know if that is just because it's French and it's romantic language and the translations are done well, but this one was just very beautifully written and the writing style was amazing. So I really enjoyed this one. I ended up giving it 5 stars. Next, I read Faebound. So this was one of my highly anticipated releases for this year. I was really excited about it, enough excited about it that I actually pre-ordered this book. And I think I've realized that I do not need to pre-order books and I can just wait till they're released and kind of see what people are saying about them. And if I'm that excited to read it, I'll just go pick it up release day. I don't need to pre-order. This one sat on my shelf for a really long time. I didn't get around to it till this month. I think it came out in February. I also had heard a lot of mixed reviews after its release, which I think kind of made me procrastinate picking it up because I was nervous about not liking it. My hunch was right. I didn't love it. The world was really interesting. The concepts were really interesting in this book, but they weren't fleshed out, they weren't explained, and there was a lot of potential that the writer just didn't take to the next degree. I think that she could have done so much with the different elements, and it was just a missed opportunity. The romance in this book was also insta lovey, and it goes from like lust to love real quick, and it just didn't make sense. The characters weren't super likable, especially the sister character in this book. To kind of give a brief summary, it's basically a world where there's fae, elves, and humans, and they're living in this endless war where they're constantly battling and fighting, and they're looking for like this resource which will end the battle. I can't even really summarize it. That shows you how badly and how little it made sense. Yeah, read the summary if you're interested in it. I don't think it was the worst I've ever read, but it was not very good. I ended up giving this 2 stars, unfortunately, because it just dragged. It just wasn't that interesting to me. I didn't love the characters. I didn't love the romance. And there was so much unexplained plot holes and different things in here that I was just like, why aren't you telling us why that happens? I will not be continuing in this trilogy, unfortunately. The next book I read was The Furrows. This was also part of that blind book challenge video. So again, I'm probably not going to go too deep into this book. It is about a girl who, when she's 12, her and her little brother, who is 5, go to the ocean, and her brother ends up drowning. And it's following her as she is getting older and dealing with the grief of his death and kind of reliving different moments with him and reliving his death. And it was really beautifully done. I really enjoyed the first half of it, where it follows the main character and how she is kind of processing his death. But then the second part of the book takes on the perspective of a different character that comes into the story later on. And I just didn't like that part of the story as much. I didn't understand why we had to change perspectives and go to a different person's story with different themes and different stuff going on. It just felt like it kind of diluted the first half, which we really could have simmered on for an entire book, but we didn't. So unfortunately, the first half was probably like a 4 or 5 star, and then the second half was like a 2 or 3. So I kind of just averaged it out to a 3. I would read more from this author because I think this author's writing style and writing is amazing. I just didn't love where the story went and I was a little disappointed at how it ended. So I ended up giving this one 3 stars. Then congratulations to me. I finished Throne of Glass. This was the final book in the Throne of Glass series, Kingdom of Ash. I really made it a goal this year to read this series, and I really wanted to know what all the buzz was about, and I hadn't read any of her novels. And she has 3 major series, and from what I had gathered, Throne of Glass seemed the most up my alley, and of course, it's the longest of her series. So at the end of last year, I bought a paperback box set of the whole series and was like, I will read one book every month in the new year of 2024 and finish this series. So I ended up missing 1 month, so finished the 8th book in September. But long story short, I am glad that I read it. I think this was a good ending to all of the characters. I liked how she wrapped everything up. It was definitely too long. That's been a major complaint of mine throughout the whole series is there needed to be more editing. I think that what's going on here in these plots and these characters is pretty simple. It's pretty tropey. There's a lot of, you know, basic things that are happening in these books that have been done a million times over, but I can understand how she makes this very approachable, very readable for any type of reader, especially someone who may be new to the fantasy genre. I ended up giving this one 4 stars because I did think it wrapped up the series as a whole. And looking back on the whole entire series, I don't know if I would recommend reading the series. I think I'm glad I did because it's a sense of accomplishment. But from what I got out of the story, I don't think I enjoyed it enough to read 8 books. But I committed and I did it. I'm glad I did for the completion and the accomplishment of it. But for the actual story, I don't think I needed to. But I did it. I figured out what all the buzz was about this series. And now I can kind of understand what people are talking about when they're talking about her. I don't think I'll be picking up any of her other books unless it's out of pure curiosity. Her writing is fine, but it's nothing to write home about. So, anyways, if you love this series, I I'm happy for you. I totally get it, just not for me. Overall, I think I probably would give this series as a whole like a 3.5 star. I enjoyed them enough and I'm glad that I read them. And then I finished this short little book, In the Absence of Men, literally the last day of September. After such a long book, I needed just kind of a short palate cleanser. And when I was at the bookstore, I saw this copy. I read Philippe Basson's, I hope that's how you pronounce his name, his novel Lie to Me in the beginning of the year. And I really loved that book. And I know this is his other novel that is translated to English that is one of his more popular works. So I was always keeping my eye out for this book, but I never saw this novel. I always saw Lie to Me. And so when I did see this in the bookstore, I was like, I have to grab it because it's so hard to find in bookstores. I ended up picking it up. It is a short little novel. It takes place in the summer of 1916, and it follows a 16-year-old teenager boy and his relationships with older men, one of them being 21 years old, and that is a romantic relationship. And he is a soldier that kind of goes off to war. And then he has a friendship, kind of borderline romantic relationship with a 40 something year old man, and he's kind of trying to guide him and give him advice as a fellow older gay man. And at this time, obviously, having homosexual relationships was frowned upon and was, I don't know if it was against the law, but yeah, it was something you didn't do and you did it in secret. So this book follows his relationship with the 21-year-old and the older 40 something year old. And basically, the 21-year-old goes off to war. And part of this book is in letters back and forth and him dealing with the loss of his lover going to war and his friend kind of helping him get through that. It's very beautifully written. If you're looking for something that is really romantic and something that's kind of short and sweet, this is a great book for that. Overall, enjoyed this, but I did not like it as much as his other book that I read. And I think I just ended up giving this one 3 star. The relationships were really quick to happen, so there wasn't a lot of building of that. And I think that tends to be my favorite part of, reading about romance. And then the relationship was very lusty, it was very physical. So sometimes with those kinds of books, I just can't really like get too invested in the characters and their love. So that's kind of what happened here. It was just a sweet, short palate cleanser, and I enjoyed it. I ended up giving it 3 stars. So those were all of the books that I read this month. I think I probably had one of my higher page count months, and I did go on a trip, so I didn't read that much in the month of September. So I'm really happy with my reading this month and think I did a lot of good reading. I read a lot of books that had been on my TBR for some time, and I read a lot of new kind of surprise books. So very happy about that. Kind of to talk about October TBR, I think I'm going to be doing like a thriller week where I'm going to read a couple thriller books or horror books and kind of get into the spooky feel. So I'll probably do a little series on that. And then I have a bunch of fall time books that were on my fall TBR that I shared in an earlier video that I'm trying to get through. So I'll probably continue reading those. I think I'm going to definitely get through a lot of books that I've just been wanting to and feeling in the mood for versus trying to finish goals. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.